Hi, this is Veronica Tash, reminding you once again to think critically. But we are going to discuss one of the most horrific things going on right now, which would be the SAVE Act. I thought it had died, so I didn't put out a video before, but it's back even worse than this, especially because it seems that there was some fairly high um, polling that Harvard did. I haven't looked at the details, but it's something that we need to be concerned with. Let's see here. Boom. So let's pull this up and slideshow from the beginning. We're going PowerPoint, so you're not going to be looking at me very often here. But I want to make sure I cover absolutely everything that's in here. I did not go into the details where they say strike or replace it with and et cetera, et cetera. Um, it's possible there's something important in there, but I'll let somebody else dig through that. But let's look at the SAVE Act here. Now, first off, it starts off by going for what IDs it says are acceptable. First is a real ID that shows U.S. citizenship as well. Only 5 states have this. If you get the passport version, they are all border states with Canada. So chances are you are not in a state that allows this. Next is a U.S. passport, which most Americans do not have. Followed up by military ID that shows a U.S. place of birth. That document does not exist. There's not a single military ID out there that shows a U.S. place of birth. You also may look at a government ID that shows you are a citizen of the United States. And the only one I can think of is a federal ID badge. And then we also have other government issued IDs, which would be your average driver's license or state ID normally. But you got to submit it with proof of citizenship. So you can have a birth certificate, an extract from a U.S. hospital record of birth, an adoption decree showing a U.S. birth. I'm not sure if that exists. I have seen adoption decrees. They do not specify where somebody was born, but that may just be a Michigan thing. Let me point out once again, I will have to limit what I can say as a result, but I work for the Social Security Administration. I deal with these types of documents on a daily basis, um, dealing with getting people Social Security cards. Um, you can bring a consular report of birth abroad, a naturalization certificate or a certificate of citizenship, which I think they changed the name of that partway through. Or you can have an American Indian card with the KIC classification. KIC means you're part of the Kickapoo tribe that only exists in Oklahoma and Texas, and you are a citizen. They have a KIP if you're not a citizen. Um, so that one thing is the only thing that allows for American Indian cards. If you're part of the Iroquois or the Lakota, whatever, you're not going to be able to use your American Indian card. Only that one tribe does for some reason, probably because of somebody in Oklahoma and Texas. Let me also point out that when Social Security accepts records of birth, the U.S. hospital record of birth, that is only good for 2 weeks. Essentially, it's only accepted if submitted by the hospital as part of the enumeration at birth program. So it's really weird that they allow that, but they apparently do. And I want to keep you focused on the fact that you have to do this when you show up to vote. You also have to prove it when you're registering, but you have to do this again when you vote. So drag this all with you, along with any name change documents to track all the way back to your birth certificate, connecting you to it. Why is it not forward? Okay, there we go. So some quick issues that come up with just that part. We have trained bureaucrats in the state are being second guessed by untrained volunteers. Um, if you are these people who work for the state who are going to be day in and day out looking at these documents, they're being second guessed because you have to show it again at the polls by, as you can see here, generally senior citizens who show up and volunteer to run these polls. They do this one day a year, maybe two if they're doing it for the primary as well, mainly as something to keep themselves active in the community. They are not going to be trained, or they're unlikely to be trained bureaucrats. You may have somebody who's a retiree from a place that actually would be looking at these documents, but it's probably not. It's probably just somebody who says, "Well, I want to go do something," and they go and they come in. So these are the people who are going to say, "Oh, should you have been registered at all in the first place?" And that is highly problematic. Next, name change documents are needed. And marriage certificates would be needed if you got married. A lot of people are not going to bring that marriage certificate, they're going to bring their marriage license. I have seen this so many times at Social Security, whether I need it for name change there or if I need it for a claim. I will explain to them, do not bring the license. License says you're allowed to get married. You get the certificate says you went through and got married. That's the big difference there. If somebody gets stood up at the altar, you have a marriage license. You don't have the certificate. So the license is not good enough. And many women, because they still bring it in, men too, they will bring the damn marriage license after I explain that. And you're going to see that at the polls, people not bringing that right document to prove it. Now, these senior citizens who are untrained, maybe they're not going to notice the difference. Maybe they'll let somebody through. Maybe not. If they do catch that properly, you are not going to be able to vote properly until, well, we'll go into what they allow you to do later. Divorce decrees may have been treated as restoring your name, but they didn't explicitly do so. For example, I know with Social Security, the rules are that you have to have it explicitly state on that divorce decree that you are, that your name has been restored. However, usually people don't actually follow that. But if they're worried about getting in trouble, paying a bunch of money, um, yeah, hold on just one moment. Um, they very well may not let that pass. And so, oh, your name wasn't restored, so this next marriage certificate, or you have this in your ID and your maiden name even. But we're not going to accept that as valid. That's not a proper chain for your legal name. Um, and so they just, you can't vote, and you may be stuck because, like I said, with Social Security, we are not supposed to accept it if it doesn't have that explicit statement. I know definitely in my office, everybody does. I have questioned this. There's no resolution because only management can send anything up for verification, and they don't want to go through that trouble for that. So they may get their name changed on a whole bunch of different documents, have another marriage under that maiden name again, when it shouldn't be there. And it can cause problems where maybe somebody can't ever prove that that's their name, unless they go spend hundreds of dollars, like I did, to have my name legally changed by a judge. And that's a whole big process to do. So that is definitely less than ideal. You may need multiple marriage certificates and divorce decrees, or death certificates of dead spouses, depending what happened in your life. And so, can you imagine bringing in, five different documents to prove that you have the right to vote? That's what we're looking at if the Save Act passes. And this is the most horrific part, yeah. Um, I'm going through everything that I was able to nab up here. You need the proof of citizenship when registering to vote as well, which generally you don't. I could not find it, but I do remember seeing something recently about a judge who had ruled it unconstitutional to require that. And I am not sure if that's the same thing as when they just said that President Trump can't require it. I'm not 100% sure. But you're probably going to have issues one way or another with requiring it while registering it. And it also says that you have to verify your citizenship to get a photo ID from the state in the first place. Why that's in there, I don't know. That's weird. It seems you would, at that point, uh, should just be able to use your photo ID after that's gone through long enough, but they do not say that. And it's not one of the acceptable IDs. So there's some real issues there. Um, so if you have, it's also going to be an issue that if you have non-citizens not able to get photo IDs, can't get a driver's license, that's going to cause a whole bunch of problems on its own. Remind, you know, remember, remind yourself, I should say. I was going to say remind you. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe mind you, I'm not sure. But uh, most immigrants are here completely legally. They have the right to work and stuff like that. You would think you'd want, people to be able to drive if they're doing that. Um, there's things like international driver's licenses that you people will bring. Um, it causes a real problem if you can't allow them to have a photo ID. Let's move on. Now, says you can register to vote if your name does not match with your proof of citizenship, such as your birth certificate, by using documents. Put use should be approved by the state. State has their own rules, but they also say it's subject to guidance by the Election Assistance Commission. So that is telling you that this federal agency that's under the president has the right to overrule the states. They can give whatever guidance they want, and that becomes the law. Which is one thing if Congress comes in and passes laws regulating elections. It's a completely different thing to allow a federal agency to do that by fiat. And that is what they are allowing, which makes this whole act right there unconstitutional. They have a little passage in there saying that if you strike down one part of it, it does. It's everything else stays intact. which is questionable. I do not think that is something valid to be put into a law. If it if the court decides that it's all unconstitutional because of something, then it's all unconstitutional because of something. But theoretically, they could just knock down that one part. But we have in a serious issue because they could say, "Oh, you're not allowed to accept any proof of name change." Oh, now married woman can't vote. Now trans people can't vote. Well, married women who kept their name would be able to. Married men who changed their name wouldn't be able to vote. There are issues where people will go and they'll both change their names to a compound name. And so, of course, they're going to need to get an extra marriage certificate because they are not going to be both carrying the same thing to the polls. Poll workers are going to want to see them separately. If your name has been recently changed, you can use an attestation, and um, they give a specific example of recently married women. Um, and so that what is recently? That seems to be up to the Election Assistance Commission, isn't it? Um, so they may say, oh, if you got married in the past 2 days and your ID doesn't have that on there yet, well, you're allowed to go by. They may say 2 days is too long. You're only given one day. It's not reasonable, but it's something that they could theoretically do. That overrides the state. And the states have the primary control over this stuff. It can be regulated by Congress, cannot be regulated by a federal agency to determine what guidance is going to override state law. Um, it's also unconstitutional as voting is a right, not a privilege. When you look at the burden of evidence, if the government wants to take something from you, they have the burden of evidence. If you want to imprison somebody, take away their liberty, the government has the burden of evidence. They're the ones who have to prove that you meet this. So if they want to take away your right to vote, they have to prove that you are not a citizen. You have to get due process and all that. If you want something from the government, such as you want Social Security benefits, you want a Social Security card, these are things that are not constitutional rights. Um, then you have to prove things. So you may have to prove you're disabled. You have to prove your age. You have to prove that you're not working potentially. Things like that, because of the nature of what we're talking about. And this is putting the burden of proof on you as a voter to prove you have the right to vote, which is at least a thorny constitutional issue. Time, which they don't specify what time, is given to give additional information in respect to your citizenship status. It doesn't say for name changes. It just says in respect to your citizenship status, you're given additional time. This poorly worded statement um, really is unconstitutionally vague. Um, you're not specifying how much time is being given. That's a huge problem. And why are you only giving it in respect to your citizenship status? Should that include the documentation to show that this is your citizenship status or not? That's not made clear. It's very, very vague how they want to enforce this. And that is a huge problem. That means that they can enforce it selectively, they can force it how they want to. They may say, oh, we want, they can change it from state to state potentially, what those rules are. And that's a huge problem. Red flag. So now let's get into the Privacy Act violations because there's a whole big section that's basically just Privacy Act violations. Now, a law can amend the Privacy Act. This one doesn't. It says um, it goes and amends several other laws. It does not mention the Privacy Act. But states must submit all voter registration rolls to DHS to go through their SAVE system. Yeah, that's not supposed to be happening. That's not a Privacy Act violation there. Well, it's not a federal Privacy Act because federal Privacy Act talks about what federal agencies are allowed to share, not about what states are allowed to share. But there's probably privacy acts in many of these states that say they're not allowed to share that kind of information. I believe Minnesota is one of those. But this is one of the things that the ICE terrorists apparently were being deployed to try to get from Minnesota because, oh, ICE will leave if you give us those voter registration rolls. They may also use other sources to question citizenship, not specifying what sources. Specifically suggests that the Social Security Administration may be one of those. Documentation from them can be provided through an agreement with the agency, but that can't be the sole reason for removal from the list. And that may be very well that people generally don't update that information right away. We get a lot of people who are naturalized citizens who may have been 20 years since they were naturalized. Can't remember back when they were naturalized. They're guessing at the year. And they're applying for Social Security benefits. Well, to get that, you have to be U.S. citizen or show that you are lawfully in the United States. You have LAPR, lawfully admitted for permanent residence. You're allowed here in the United States. You have to show that to get it. If you're getting it while you are in the United States, you could always leave the country and get it as long as you don't go to North Korea or Cuba. I think they're the only two that are prohibited right now. Um, I'm sure Iran will be soon. But you have to have that proof. People don't update that. Though they already got a job while they were legal immigrant, while they were LAPR, they become a citizen. They're happy with that. They don't bother telling us. So it would be a huge problem if they use that as the sole reason. Uh, but that's really the only information that could be possibly useful for that purpose. Any state may request information from any federal department or agency, says the head of the agency, but whenever the laws say that, it's always some power that's delegated to employees below them. For example, only the head of the agency can decide who's the representative payee for somebody for Social Security benefits. I make that decision. I'm not the head of the agency. It was delegated probably 50 years ago or more by some commissioner down to claims representatives to make that decision. Um, and so that's what it says, but they may request the information from any federal department of agency, which may have relevant information about citizenship status, and the federal official must give all batched information requested without limitation. Um, so this is a huge Privacy Act problem. Let's say Texas goes and they want to know about whether this person who applied to vote is a citizen. So they send out to the FBI to go find out. They can go get the entire FBI file if that's what they request, and the FBI has to give the state that information. If they go, let's say they go to the Social Security Administration and ask about that, and they ask, are there any other people who are that you have um, that they may have children, while they may be getting benefits and have Social Security children getting benefits under them. Well, boom, there you go. Social Security Administration is unlawfully giving that information to the states. Um, which, like I said, they could have amended the Privacy Act to make that legal. Now we have conflicting law, and that's basically due to the fact that the SAVE Act is very poorly written. It is there just for some last ditch effort. It is not something that should be taken seriously, but it's there. DHS will use its SAVE system to verify the status each time, which I read as each year because they're submitting this information to DHS every year. There's questions whether they're going to use that domestic terror list or terrorist list. If you were protesting ICE, they're taking your picture saying, oh, you're a domestic terrorist now. They may use that and say, oh, we're going to also say that we're not going to verify those people. We're not going to say that the U.S. is, even if they're not in the SAFE system at all. Um, and the SAFE system, I do want to point out, only would have documented immigrants. It doesn't have undocumented immigrants in it. But we use that when we're doing social security cards. It's a pain in the ass. You have to type in everything exactly right, and it will sometimes say, "Okay, you're good to go," and then not tell you, "Oh, we decided to start an investigation on this because they can't verify their own records fast enough." Um, and when they do an investigation, that's could be 30 days or something like that. That's not reasonable if somebody needs to register to vote. Let's say you turn 18 on October 20th of that year. You go to register to vote. Oh, well, say that or the SAVE system isn't verifying. It's only going to verify it fast if you're a legal immigrant. So if you are a US citizen, it is going to take 30 days or more for them to do that investigation. That's how the SAFE system works. Um, if yeah, so that's going to be a huge problem. But that's what they're going to do because these states have to make sure that you absolutely are a citizen, and they have to verify with the government that you're not an immigrant or you're not a non-citizen still. Federal agencies will share unspecified information. I It specifies my word. They don't specify which information, but they have to share information with one another about the applicant. Another Privacy Act violation. If you come to me and you say, I am selling crack to kindergartners, and that's how I make my money. I work for Social Security. If I go call the IRS to have you taxed, I can lose my job because I'm not allowed to tell them what you told me. If I call the FBI to say this guy's selling crack to kindergartners, I'm not allowed to do that. I lose my job. Possible criminal penalties. Um, but this is saying that, oh, now they're going to all share all this information, which is probably a big part of it. They want to have all this information shared to spy on you. That's what it has to do with. But this is saying, oh, let's spy on everybody. And of course, we're not talking about any politician or party here. So I can say all I want about Trump because he can't run again. And he sure as hell ain't talking about running for anything lower. But, the Hatch Act is important. It says that we can't do things like, spend government funds on advertisements for partisan political purposes. Of course, you never seen anything like that. Except for during the shutdown, during the shutdowns. We have all these federal funds being illegally sent there. And I could say that because that's not for or against any partisan political party, a candidate, or anything else. That's a blatant Hatch Act violation. Um, and there seems to be selective enforcement of that. They would come down on me with like a ton of bricks. Um, Now, DHS will start an investigation to remove all who are unlawfully registered to vote, which seems a bit extreme because a lot of times you have people don't speak proper English, and they're already registered to vote, but they never vote because they never intended to register to vote. Um, they just answered a question, yes, yes, because that's what they thought they were supposed to say, and they just don't speak good enough English to know what they were asked. Um, and which may be a reason that you may want to prove citizenship at registration, but like I said, you're not seeing them vote generally. You look at, where you go into the numbers, it's not something that really happens very often at all. But they're gonna do their investigation to remove anyone who got on there. States must remove all that are deemed to be non-citizens, and this is why I'm worried about the domestic terrorist list, because these are the people who are against me. Yeah, let's take away the right to vote. We're going to say that we can't verify their citizenship status. And it's going to be some internal rule regarding, not allowing, not verifying information about domestic terrorists, which just means people who protested the Trump regime. So states have to remove those people automatically because they have to verify with all this. Because they're also going to SSA is going to verify citizenship info with each state, and states must pay the cost. And so I give you for an example, if you're going to, and you want a detailed list of your earnings, everybody that Social Security knows that you work for. It only covers 1978 on because they didn't keep track of who your employer was before 1978, which is less of an issue now because most people who are working, who are still going to need this kind of information are we're not working in 1978 or before 78 rather. But it's something that I could print off really quickly. It would take me about 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds with how the systems are all messed up now. But, take another 30 seconds to go to the printer, staple it. The most extensive thing um, that would cost any time for us or money would be trying to process the payment. That would be a pain in the ass. But we charge $100 or more. I'm not sure. You can look up SSA 7050 for that. It says right on the form how much they charge right now. But we charge $100 for that. Verifying this information can get very expensive to the states. This is a way of taking state tax money, sending it to the federal government, which at least it seems to be funding Social Security. But who knows what's going to happen with that? They'll just cut. Um, I don't even know because that Social Security's funds normally come uh, from the Social Security trust funds. So that's where my paycheck comes from. So I don't know what they're going to do. They can't really redirect it towards another agency because they can't cut Social Security's funding and then raise it for another agency because they're coming from two different funds. Only Social Security's money comes from the trust funds. Um, you try to give it towards ICE or the FBI or whatever, they come from the general fund. It's why it makes no sense that the Social Security Administration is part of budget shutdowns and all that, and why they're worried about cutting stuff to Social Security to balance the budget. It's a different fund. But we also have penalties for error. First off, you have a private right of action against any official who registers someone who fails to provide proof of citizenship. Who's going to know? Who's going to do? I don't know. It's very weird. But this is a big thing that we have been seeing lately, giving the right for people to sue, because even if it's frivolous, if I just don't like my the local person at Secretary of State, I can just sue them, and I can say it's because you gave this person. It could come back that that completely did not happen, but I'm suing this person individually. They can't afford that. They're a freaking public servant, and they're not somebody who has three federal executive jobs or who is getting a whole bunch of kickbacks. This is some local person at your DMV or Secretary of State or whatever they call in your state. Um, and so that is something that's got to be scary. There's also criminal penalties. First off, for any federal employee who gives material assistance to a non citizen in attempting to register to vote. That is very, very close to what it actually says in there, word for word. It might be exactly, I know I didn't cut and paste the whole thing, but I tried to use this, make sure the language was the same. And this is very unspecified. Uh, you could construe this if I wanted to make a case. I told you where you need to go to register to vote. That's material assistance. You wouldn't have known where to go to register, and so I don't know that you are a non-citizen, and so boom, I gave you that material assistance. I can go to prison. Um, it it may include giving necessary documentation. They do not will be used for that. So let's say some says you get a social security card. You come to me, you put in for the social security cards, get come back and say, not valid for or what does it say? It it says it's not proof of citizenship. Make sure that you have something about you need to have proof of legal residency, etc. I can't remember exactly what it says. I've only seen it a couple times on a card. I do initial cards for a lot of people who are non-citizens. I don't do um, so much where I ever see their card. You might even do a replacement card, but it's because they lost the card, like U.S. citizens do, or got destroyed. Usually, it's not people who've been around long enough that they have it all tattered, and so I get to see what it looks like as we destroy that old card and issue a new one. But they have that. They go into the Secretary of State. Secretary of State obviously sees you know, you're not able to go vote. That says you're a non-citizen. Well, I gave material assistance now, didn't I? Because I gave them that Social Security card. I have no idea it is. That could be argued that it's there. I mean, anything. It doesn't specify. There has to be in furtherance of that. It has to be material assistance to that person. And what is material is very open. It means it made some sort of a difference to their ability uh, to make that attempt. Um, that's all that material means. Doesn't if it's in furtherance, that would suggest, oh, I have to be trying to help them to cause that. But this just says, oh, if you gave material assistance. So you may see some crazy things coming down because of that if this passed. Um, and then think of how people have been convicted of felony murder, for example, for loaning a car to a murderer. Legal Eagle did a good video covering some of this where, yeah, roommate said, oh, yeah, you can borrow my car or whatever. Had no idea what the guy was up to. He let out the car. He got convicted of felony murder because somebody killed somebody when they went out with that car. So you were materially involved because you loaned your car. Guess what? Felony murder. And this is somebody who all they did is they said, okay, you're my roommate. Yeah, you can use my car. That is the type of thing that we're talking about. But there's also criminal penalties for election officials who purposely register somebody without documented proof of citizenship. Whatever, fair enough. For that last part. Now they also have just a couple things to go on before we go to the next big section. The Elections Assistance Commission will issue guidance within 10 days, which means they have everything planned out. They're just not putting it into the bill. But this is some Trump appointee who um, already knows what they're going to say, what this is, but that's being hidden from the public. They'll want to put it into the bill. There'll be some, because especially that's an extremely short time frame. This is uh, just completely unworkable. Um, the Paperwork Reduction Act also does not apply to voter registration paperwork, it says. Now, you may not be familiar with that act. You see it. I had to look up exactly what it was to make sure I had a good sense of it because it does. I see it on every form that we put in. Not much beyond. No, I. It doesn't really play into anything besides me seeing it on the back in my day-to-day stuff. So I went to go look it up, and what it does is it requires that government agencies only collect information which is necessary, useful. It does not duplicate other efforts. So in this case, yeah, you may get a whole, you go apply to vote, or you put your voter registration to be moved from state to state. Maybe you're a new voter. You may get a whole bunch of stuff from 17 different federal agencies are saying, oh, give us this, because your state reach out to those people and ask for information. So they're going to go try to reach out to you. And you got to do that. They're going to ask for things that aren't unnecessary, which aren't useful to deciding whether you're a citizen or not. They may ask, oh, did you ever have any traffic violations? They can do that. Is that relevant to whether you have a right to vote or not? No. But the the Paperwork Reduction Act does not apply here if this passes. So that's something that is serious. Um, it says that the above provisions do not exclude somebody from filing a provisional ballot. This is the end of that first section. It doesn't say that for the bottom part. So it brings some questioning of whether you have a right to a provisional ballot, especially because the next section, which is not included with that guarantee, um, it does say provisional ballots must be resolved within 3 days, which suggests that there is some sort of provisional ballot. Yet it requires the ID already described. So you don't have the ID that day. You got to come in with it within 3 days. Or you have to have an affidavit of a religious objection to being photographed. So that's really weird. But okay, so that's what it allows. But then it also states that the states cannot provide a ballot to someone without photo identification, which this is really confusing because a provisional ballot is a type of ballot. So does the state have to give you a provisional ballot, or are they forbidden from giving you a provisional ballot? Um, Now the stuff above didn't prevent you from doing it, but the statement says that they cannot give you a ballot. It doesn't say that that doesn't prevent you from getting a provisional ballot. And of course, that brings up more of the lines aren't clear. We're going to do what we want to do. So it is highly problematic, especially because they're trying to do this right before an election, trying to say, oh, we need to pass this right now. That is freaking ridiculous. Okay, so now we're going to go into mail in voting. It requires a copy of a photo ID. At Social Security, if we tell you we need a copy of your ID, we want to see the actual ID. We need a copy of your marriage certificate. We need a certified copy of the marriage certificate. Apparently, does not mean that here. Um, it's highly implied by what comes next, but you need that copy of photo ID or an attestation um, that you are not able to obtain such an ID. God, I messed that up. I wrote does to the military. I'm trying to remember what that was. I think that it's an exception where if you're in the military, you do. I think it does not apply to the military. Um, so you don't have to. If you're in the military, you don't have to give your ID. Only they don't have to prove their ID, which may also be a problem because that means, oh, your commanding officer may intercept your mail ballot and vote for you. But yeah, so that is something that is there. Now, states, now this is where the problem comes in, or where we, not the problem, this is where we know it doesn't require photo ID like you do need with the other stuff. States and local governments must provide access to photo imaging devices, such as copiers or printers, to make copies of valid IDs. Federal government's not going to do this. They're going to put this cost on the state as well. And I am so unsure that they're allowed to put these costs on the state. Um, but I'm not sure. It seems like it could be valid, but yeah. So lawyer would have to deal with that. I'm not going to say whether they can or can't put those burdens on the state, but it seems like it's putting part of their budget to it. Now, making photocopies isn't necessary enough, but it's going to, or isn't super expensive, other than the time of the employees who have to go through and copy it for you, because they're not going to have that out in the open. These Now the IDs which work for mail-in voting are not the same ones that you need for in-person voting. If you're doing a mail-in voting, it can be a photocopy of your driver's license, state ID, U.S. passport, military ID, where they do not say you have. It has to say you have a U.S. birth, or a tribal. Why? Why is the military ID available if it doesn't apply to the military that they have to give anything at all? Once again, they're not thinking things through. They just threw this haphazardly. So why a majority of Americans apparently are behind this bill? Clearly, they haven't looked at what's actually in it. Tribal government ID with a photo and expiration date is allowed. So you don't. It's not limited to one tribe. The rest of them can vote by mail potentially. But states cannot have a universal vote by mail. It must be by request. You have to specifically request it, which isn't a horrible burden. Universal vote by mail is fairly recent, but they're also it's what's less recent is the restrictions that they're trying to put on mail in voting or absentee voting. They're interchangeable terms together. So we have in you can do it if you're an absent uniformed services voter. So that's the military again. If you're unable to appear in person due to illness, infirmity, hospitalization, or physical disability, if you're the primary caregiver of somebody medically incapacitated in the entire period, if you will be absent the entire time due to verified travel, if you will be unable to appear due to another hardship, which would make in person voting unreasonable and impracticable, to be construed narrowly. They say it has to be construed narrowly, where a single factor and not a combination of factors um, is prevent you from being able to come in. I have no idea what that other personal hardship is, but it has to be a single factor. Can't be this happened, this happened, this happened. No, only one. You need one, and it has to be enough. And you have to prove these hardships via statement and documentation. Now, keep in mind, there's a curious phrasing. Um, yes, things have to be for the entire period, the entire time that you can vote. So that includes the entire early voting period, the entire mail in voting period, apparently. It doesn't quite specify, but you would think it would be all of it. So let's say you end up in the hospital 2 weeks before the election. Did you know that before? When the mail-in voting started. If you didn't, well, guess what? You can't do a mail-in vote because you were not able to. You were not. Was that the one that was in there? Well, that one says unable to. That might not be a good example. Your spouse gets hit by a car and ends up goes to hospital, comes back, and you're the primary caregiver, and you gotta watch them because they're in critical condition. They got discharged from the hospital, so you are the primary caregiver. But were you unable to go the entire time? No, this was just 2 weeks before. You could have done it beforehand. So you can't do it by mail order voting. Uh, you are going to be gone on election day, so you can't vote in person. Oh, but you're leaving 3 days before election day. That's not the entire time. Maybe your state doesn't have early voting. Doesn't matter. There was mail-in voting. You can't do it. You're not gonna be able to do mail-in voting because you weren't absent the entire time. Uh, there's some serious issues there, and that's something that you would expect would be enforced in this case. And what's also interesting is though you are doing all the stuff with the absentee voting, you are allowed to do it in person to turn it in. Um, so this is more of they didn't think it through. Why are you turning in your absentee ballot in person if you're saying that the entire time you couldn't do this? You couldn't show up in person. It's just simply they didn't think it through. They're throwing this haphazardly together. It's based on sudden. I speak against the thing. I'm not going to risk saying that because it may impugn something else. Um, I'm playing it safe here. But note that if you become hospitalized after early voting begins, you're not eligible. Hospitalization wasn't actually one, but there's other things that will prevent you from doing mail-in voting if it happens after it's too late. Um, Absentee ballots must be received by the closing of polls. So if they know that you postmarked it in time, if let's say you sent it 1 month early before, but the post office just doesn't deliver it, and they deliver it the day afterwards, and all that. Guess what? Your vote doesn't count, even though you did what you were supposed to do in time. It does not count because it wasn't received by the closing of the polls. And they will also notify any of these mail-in voters of any deficiency. And you only have 48 hours from when polls close to fix it. So let's say your stuff arrives the day before election day, on election day, 3 days before election day. How are they contacting you? If you've ever filled out one of those, doesn't ask for your, I don't remember it asking me for my email address, ask me for my phone number. They're going to mail it to you. That that takes like usually like a week for stuff to come through the mail if it's coming from a centralized location like that. So by the time you get notification that there's something wrong, it's too late. That is something that is a big potential problem. The Attorney General will have access to all absentee voting records. Why? Just so that they can weaponize it, I guess. Uh, and aggrieved persons, I'm not sure who would be potentially an aggrieved person. On this absentee voting subsection, get a private right of action. So if they give a mail in vote to your neighbor and you for some reason feel you have standing in court, you're an aggrieved person, you can take a private right of action against whoever approved them to do a mail in voting. It's still lost on me how somebody would have possibly be aggrieved by that. This is somebody who has a right to vote already established through all that stuff, being able to vote by mail. How are you aggrieved that they were allowed to do it? But they're seeing some way that that potentially could happen. And remember, with all this stuff, it is something that just kills stuff because you are suing a private citizen. You're not suing the Secretary of State. You have a private action against the official, and you're tying them up in litigation. They can have 20 lawsuits against them, and they're paying them themselves, um, paying an attorney for all that stuff. That the private right of action thing needs to go away. Should not be in any bill to go after a separate official for something stupid like that. Something that just anyone's gonna sue you for that just because they suspect or whatever that may be. That they have also, you gotta keep in mind to give somebody private right of action for this, you're also giving information to these private citizens. So let's say I sue you. My next door neighbor um, is hospitalized and gets absentee voting. I see them, or I see somebody turning in that ballot for them, mailing it out, whatever. I can go sue for that. Sue for that. Now there's discovery with that as well. So if I have a private course of action, I get to go into their medical files. Oh, they're in the hospital because of this, this, and this. Why do I have access to that information? Why do I have the right to sue and get that information, even though I have no basis for filing my lawsuit? That is one of those huge issues with the private right of action. But it's used as a nuclear bomb deterrent type thing. Oh, if I'm going to sue people if they do this wrong, they're just not going to do it at all because they're afraid of being sued. Because you don't have to be found guilty or found at fault, rather. You don't get found guilty for a lawsuit. You have to get found at fault for it to devastate you financially. Um, and finally, the Attorney General may take away federal funding from any state which they determine doesn't meet their requirements. So all they have to do, Attorney General says, "Oh, I got Michigan's voting records, absentee voting records. They gave John Smith a absentee ballot. I don't think that was valid. They get none of the funding. We're going to just give the funding to people we want to give it to." That is something that's made possible by the SAVE Act. Now, there's also two things that got added on with this newest thing that's being discussed because we're not going through a House version. The Senate version is what's being pushed. Trump says he won't sign anything unless they pass the SAVE Act, the Strong Act, not the Weak House Act. And they're going to have to also ban trans people in sports and blah blah blah. The other I'm not sure exactly how we phrase the other trans issue. But so our first thing is here. This is part of the SAVE Act now. Notice it has absolutely nothing to do with voting. But no males by reproductive biology or genetics may participate in girls' or women's sports. if the institution is federally funded at all. So, effectively, this means they have to do genetic testing of all girls' sports participants. And that's because it has to exclude people with Swyer syndrome. Swyer syndrome are cisgender women. They have existed since the beginning of time. They grow up. They have before we ever found genes. These people existed. They have XY chromosomes. They develop as women because that's the default, and they have some testosterone insensitivity that they don't react to the testosterone. So their body doesn't say, "Oh, I'm supposed to have male body parts and body hair, and I'm supposed to be, attracted um, to women and all that stuff." That doesn't happen. Usually, these people be like this because they would go into the doctor saying, "I'm having problem conceiving." This is traditionally before we had, the mail by order genetic testing. This is how you found out that you were, um, that you had XY chromosomes. I can't figure out why I'm not fertile. Why am I not having kids? And so doctor goes through, does genetic testing. Oh, you have the chromosomes of a man. Well, right there, their genetics says they're a man. Now they can't go into girls' sports, even though they never had any of the, um, any development like a man. They're banned. And in order to do this, they have to genetically test anybody who is doing girls or women's sports at any of these high schools, elementary schools, junior highs, colleges, etc. Um, you got to get genetically tested now, or they lose all their federal funding, even if the federal funding's not for that sport program. Then the much larger part is transphobia in healthcare. And we're not going to go through absolutely everything it goes through. It covers a lot of things that are already illegal, are made illegal again, because they're trying to tie it into things. Once again, this is completely unrelated to voting. This is about attacking trans people. Donald Trump insists it has to be in there. So it bans, quote, chemical castration and, quote, genital or body mutilation of minors. And both these terms are defined in ways other than you would expect. And we're going to go into that because it goes through, and um, I actually moved it up before I went to some other stuff, just so that you would know what it's counting. So before we go into the exceptions, for some reason, it gave the exceptions before it gave what these things were. Once again, horribly poorly written, but it adds uh, perpetrators get fines and up to 10 years in prison if they do any of these things. It adds those when it comes to female genital mutilation, which it would be if you that's female circumcision. Generally, that's cutting off the clitoris completely. It could be just removing the clitoral hood, but that's much different than removing a foreskin for a man. Even though it's functionally the same part, the effect it has on the clitoris is completely different than what it has on the glands. Essentially, it's going to make it so that a woman, cannot get any sort of sensation. But if you consent to transport, or even if you loan money to somebody because you gave money towards it, even if you didn't know, um, you're you're going to be potentially liable to that fine and 10 years in prison because it's loosely worded, it's poorly designed. So you loan your neighbor $20 in gas money. The neighbor just asks, "Can I have gas money?" They go take their girl out to get that female circumcision. You have no idea. You've never suspected it. Guess what? You're still going to prison because that's how loosely this is worded. You cannot prosecute the person who is bodily mutilated or chemically castrated, which is weird. Why is that being brought up? Um, what if they contributed money themselves towards it? They were worried about, which means that this is somebody who is actively wanting whatever it is. Um, but you can't prosecute them. Okay, whatever. It sort of didn't need to be said. Why would you have gone after them anyways? Um, it includes main procedures which are obvious and already illegal, which are common sense. For example, you can't straight up chop off a boy's penis just because. Nobody's doing that. That even if you're doing genital reassignment surgery, you don't just chop it off. But they're going to throw that in because they wanted the. It's more propaganda. It's trying to make people think this is what trans healthcare is you chop off the penis. No, it goes a whole bunch of things about um, change. You can't groom this. You can't remove testicles. You can't change the vagina. All these very specific things that you're going into. You can't do a mastectomy. So sorry, boys with gynecomastia. You may not want it, but you can't get it if this passes. I think it's still already illegal for under 18 to get that. But that's saying that they're straight up outlawing. It's done across the board. But let's look at what they are counting as chemical castration or genital bodily mutilation. That does need to be brought up because it's not clear and obvious. You would not have expected this to be in there. So puberty blockers are considered chemical castration. How? Those are things that are given to cis children with precocious puberty. And that's going to be coming up again. It doesn't castrate you. It just prevents you from going through puberty while you're taking it. When you stop taking the puberty blockers, it has the side effect that your puberty starts as normal. So this is something that trans children take when they're not sure. No, you're not old enough to make that decision, but you're going to take this so that you don't have anything happen in the interim. But that is considered chemical castration here. Hormone therapy, which you don't get as a minor. You once again you wait till you're 18 for that. But that's considered chemical castration. Uh, Mastectomies are considered bodily mutilation. So those, if you're a boy, you have those male breasts, and you get them cut off. Your body was mutilated; it was destroyed. That's what this bill is saying. Because that's bodily mutilation. Breast implants, also bodily mutilation. Facial masculinization or feminization is bodily mutilation. Male circumcision, which to this, it doesn't specifically mention it. It seems to be not wanting to mention it because it covers female circumcision. But if you're looking from a legal matter, it would count as penectomy, which is something that is banned. The medical literature will not treat a circumcision as that, but it is removing part of the penis. The foreskin is a part of the penis. It's not part of the shaft, but it's part of the penis. And so um, it specifically it says that's a partial penectomy. Um, and so I think that if you're talking legally, this would be construed by courts as to ban um, male circumcision, which is beneficial. It's something that the APA is a, or is it whatever it is, that major American pediatric association. It's got to be APA, but they they say it is something that is more beneficial, more benefits than harms, because the harms are extremely rare. Most of them are made up by people who just want to body shame people who have it. Um, and it does say from things that are rare, but whether it's not significant enough that they're going to recommend it universally, but they would say the benefits are greater than the harms. That's being banned by this because they worded it too fucking loosely. They don't know what they're doing. This is a horrible law, even if you were for what they're trying to do. If you are for preventing trans healthcare, this is a horrible thing to put in because that's not about trans healthcare. If you're against, uh, you think that we need to go after the very little amount of people who are voting as non-citizens. We're going to go into those numbers in a bit. You don't want to pass this bill because it does so many other things that are not intended because it is worded so poorly. This is like it was written by a seventh grader with ChatGPT. Um, so, um, especially if you're Jewish culturally, you want you think that Jewish men should be circumcised at birth. You don't want to support this bill because it will ban you from being able to do it. And no one's gonna do it. You ain't gonna be the hospital, ain't gonna be a rabbi gonna go spend 10 years in prison for giving a circumcision. Um, Now, so here are the exceptions that they put before defining anything. If it's for the health of the child, but not the mental, behavioral, or emotional health, they're trying to say very clearly this isn't about, we're trying to exclude trans kids. This is only if you have a physical malady that requires it. And that's because there's very strong arguments for mental health, behavioral health, emotional health for trans kids to get things like puberty blockers. Um, Down the point, it saves lives. But if the patient is intersex, has abnormal chromosomes, abnormal sex steroid hormone production, or abnormal sex steroid action, and once again, that would be our Swire syndrome girls. So apparently, they can get hormone therapy to get pregnant as a teen, before 18, where many states it's illegal for them to have sex at all. They want to make sure they can get pregnant. So there's an exception for that. I can't know who else has abnormal sex steroid action. But that's all excluded. So you can, straight up, if you have an intersex child, they're both male and female working parts. You can pick and choose and cut one out, no problem. But if that child then comes back and says you did it wrong, you picked the wrong one, well, you know what? You can't get it fixed. If it's due to infection, disease, injury, or disorder caused by prior genital or bodily mutilation or chemical castration, they're talking about detransing. So if you had a child that was it's really weird because a child cannot get anything that's actually there. But let's say theoretically you had a child that had got a mastectomy. You could give them breast implants. That's okay because you're undoing the harm that was done. Blah blah blah. But the they already you're not. They don't give kids those procedures. It's been a long time where it's harder for trans kids to get it than cis kids. It's easier for a cis kid to get a mastectomy than a trans kid to get a mastectomy. It's easier for a cis girl to get a vaginoplasty. I believe they can get that. I don't know, maybe it's just Britain, but I remember seeing something on it. But they could get the cis girl can get a vaginoplasty, but not a trans girl because you can't get the sexual reassignment. I mean, it makes sense at that point. You don't want it would be only an extremely extreme circumstance where you want to prove a minor getting those serious things, which is why you have puberty blockers. But you can also do it if there's a physical injury, disorder, illness, which would impair major bodily functions not done. So if you have a young boy come up with testicular cancer, you can move his testicle then. Okay, yeah, of course that makes sense. And then you could do it for precocious puberty, so as to normalize puberty, which tells you a lot because it's not chemical castration. You are not permanently castrating these kids because they're having puberty at 8 years old or 6 years old, whatever is considered precocious puberty. Um, that it that is not sterilizing. It's not chemical castration, but they count it as this in this bill because they could just use that term when they're speaking, and people are like, oh yeah, that is horrible. Because yes, it would be horrible to chemically castrate kids, but that's not what's being done. It is, I mean, it's blood libel, is what it is. It's very dishonest. So, issues with the premise. Um, and this is going back to the voting part. The Heritage Foundation of Project 2025 fame are behind this measure. They found 68 cases of non citizens voting going back about 45 years. That is 1.5 votes, not voters per year. This is instances. So if one person voted twice, it counts twice, not just once. So this is every time that somebody has voted. This is what they found after searching for years. Doesn't count the person that ICE claims to have found that voted in 5 elections. So that would bring it up to 73. But of course, who trusts ICE at this point? They just lie through their teeth about stuff to the point that courts don't trust them. Now, that averages 1.5 votes per year. Now, if we just look at the past or the most recent 20 years they can look at, there were only 24 cases of non citizens voting nationwide. That's an average of 1.1 votes per year. So now the right wing Cato Institute, and I point out the right wing because it's kind of important here because they're on the side, you know, they're on the same side of American society as the Heritage Foundation. They suggested looking into all possible cases, not only those prosecuted. And the point of this is you want to look how much could there be that we're not discovering? And they did to make a point. They're not saying count, we should be counting them all. They're saying let's, as an intellectual exercise, let's do this. They point out in their thing about the Trump administration is lying about non-citizen voting or whatever it's called. I pulled it up earlier. Don't have it open right now. There was one possible non-citizen voter in Utah where they went through an extensive search of all their voter registration rolls. They found one person. They're not sure if they're a citizen or not. One person. There were 36 registered, highly likely non citizens, only some of whom ever voted in Louisiana. Now, mind you, they're highly likely is what they were found to be by the state of Louisiana. They were not proven yet to be non citizens. It seems that some of them never voted. This could be people that's just attested accidentally, whatnot. But You could have up to 36 people in the state of Louisiana voting each election, even though most of them haven't voted. Um, they also brought up my county clerk, Anthony Ferlini, Macomb County, Michigan. But he found 15 presumed non citizen. They say he found 15 presumed non citizens registered to vote in Macomb County out of 724,000 voters. He didn't. He found 239 people who are on the jury service rolls that are done completely separate in the state of Michigan. These are not on the same rolls. Basically, you have to go out of your way to say, no, I'm not a citizen. Don't register me for jury duty. Because they want everyone going on jury duty. So they like to presume that. But they found 239 on the jury service rolls. He didn't find them on the voter rolls. Secretary of State took his accusation and looked into it, and they found 15 on the voter rolls from the people that he listed as non citizens from those jury rolls. And so they started looking into it. And as of when Cato wrote, um, that uh, this is how many are on the rolls, not how many have voted. But 3 of them were U.S. citizens, they've proven so far. 4 were already removed from the voting rolls by the state. 4 were being looked into still, so they may be citizens, they might not be. And 4 were non citizens that were on the voter roll still. It's not a whole lot, even if they all voted, which they haven't been voting. And so that was their point. It's not a real issue. These are insanely small percentages of the electorate. They are not enough to change an election. It's inconsequential. This is not a something that is a serious issue. And like I said, we go back to what we have actually found. And people do go heavy looking for voter fraud, especially in the past 10, 20 years with all the Trump stolen election nonsense. They've been looking hard for these people. And what they found in the past 20 years is about one person per year voting nationwide who should not be voting because they're non citizens. That one person is not going to change the election. Um, so that was their whole point. Now, on the other hand, who gets disenfranchised by all this? 1.5 non citizens would be prevented from voting. And that's good. They should not be voting. We all agree on that. It's already illegal. That's why we have the law saying it's a felony for you to vote. But 1.5 over the past 45 years did 1.1 in the past 20. Um, per year do that stuff. Now, name changers, which are not all women, would be likely to bring in their marriage licenses, not their marriage certificates. This could be millions disenfranchised. They're given 3 days to correct this. Those who are married out of state, let's say they got married in Vegas. A lot of people here in Michigan, they got married in Toledo. It's not a far drive. They could probably do that theoretically. But let's say you moved here, you moved here from Tennessee, something like that. You're not going to get that unless you're willing to go drive all the way there and back. Probably an all day trip, 2 days. You're not going to get that in time to fix it if you got the license instead of the certificate. Especially with all the people going and requesting it, it's going to be delayed at that point. So you're going to be looking at, if it's not sitting there somewhere in your house that you are able to dig up and you're married out of state, you're probably going to be SOL. If you're trying to get it from even in the state with how many people might be getting it, you may be disenfranchised because they may not be able to see you in time. I know Secretary a lot of the city of Detroit, for example, you have to have an appointment to go pick up your documentation. So if you need that appointment, you may not get that in 3 days. Um, People are mugged on average every 2 seconds in America. That's 604,800 people losing their ID in the 2 weeks prior to the election. It takes at least 2 weeks to replace an ID in each state. So essentially, we can expect that 604,800 people approximately would be disenfranchised of their right to vote because they were the victim of a mugging. So the question is, should millions of people be disenfranchised to stop 1.5 people from voting? Or really just that one guy in recent years. Should we disenfranchise millions to make sure that one guy doesn't vote? What is the bigger problem here? And I would definitely argue the SAVE Act is creating a huge millions times more problem than we have with non-citizens voting. And so we also want to go into some reminders about trans teens here. Teens are given puberty blockers for gender dysphoria because it significantly reduces suicide. And some of these people, it is horrible. If you have somebody who's dysphoric enough, I think it usually does come with other mental problems as well. Um, but don't quote me on that. But they will get to the point where they will just chop off parts of their bodies and bleed out. You do not, that is why it does. It's a 73% reduction. 13 out of every 100,000 trans teens do commit suicide right now. But puberty blockers reduce that amount by 73%. So that'd be like 48, I think I did the math earlier, of every 100,000. You'd be killing all those extra kids, which is approximately, 1% of all teens are trans teens. Um, you're you're gonna kill, we're talking hundreds a year dying. I believe. I'm not doing the math on that right now. It's not important enough. The point being is it saves kids' lives. I think saving any kid's life is something that's really super important here, especially because there is no harm done. Puberty blockers are not castration. Puberty begins when they stop being taken. So usually they wait till they're 18. They decide, I want to go through with it. Let's go through with it. And I say that because there's um, a low rate of regret. There's a higher regret when people are on puberty blockers than when they get the actual surgery. But that's why you have the puberty blockers instead of going straight to the surgery. Um, Kids do change their minds, but most of them don't. Most of them stick with it. Some of them say, you know what, that's not really me. Maybe I'm more gender queer. I don't want to go through with that. Whatever the case may be. But most of them do go through and say they want to go through, get hormone therapy at the least. If they were lucky enough to go on the puberty blockers. Puberty does cause irreversible changes, especially in boys. You cannot do un you cannot undo. When I say boys, I mean the biological male thing. Um, I'm not sure that's a proper word here. Um, I'm a trans woman. I grew up as a boy, lived that life. I went through my testosterone poisoning, which is going through regular puberty as a boy. So forgive me if I misuse that here. You can undo muscle definition, and they found that you lose that advantage for sports if you're on HRT long enough. But you can't undo skeletal changes. My shoulders, how broad they are, how deep my chest is. I'm talking about like the rib cage part of the chest. That's never going to change on me. I can't do anything. There's no surgery to fix that, even if I, won millions of dollars in the lottery. Um, the hair growth, um, you know, that's there. You have to go through expensive hair removal treatments if you want to not have that happen. Um, your voice, you need surgery to prevent your voice from deepening. That's unredoable or unreversible, irreversible. Ah, long night. But yeah, because the the hormone therapy works so much better for trans men than it does for trans women. But the sexual reassignment surgery is so much better for trans women than it is for trans men. And that's what you'll hear from trans men there. But you look at trans men, they pass very well. Um, and woe to those states like Kansas that's gonna have these weird men coming into their women's room, and these are women who are required by law, or these are it's the law considers them women who are required to be there because of how they were born. These are trans men. You're not gonna tell them apart. They'll have big muscles. Their skeletal features will grow. They'll have very full beards and all that, and they get quite macho because they are so manly that they transition. So yeah, they will go. So go in here. Remember to subscribe, like, comment below to try to elevate this. If I haven't already ruined it by things that I mentioned, because I tend to cover real issues that they don't want covered. But this is how that's how you can potentially get more of it. Make sure you check the page every so often. I wish I posted more often, but realistically I can't because I'm going to school. I guess technically it's halftime, but it's grad school, working on my PhD on top of working full time. As far as the legal definition goes. Um, so I don't have a whole bunch of time to make YouTube videos like your favorite creators. But we found this informative. It was a longer one, but we had to go through the details of what is in this act because there's a lot of misinformation out there where this is being put forward as common sense. Well, don't you think it, JD Vance is saying, don't you think it should be illegal? We should make it illegal for non citizens to vote. It's already illegal. This doesn't make it illegal. It doesn't even give any consequences for people who vote illegally. It punishes people who may make a mistake. And then it goes and attacks trans people for no good reason. Um, it it is completely poorly written, and that's something that if you have it in you, watch this again. Notice how poorly written the whole thing is, or go through and read the text of the bill yourself. But this thing does not. Um, it was not well thought out. This is something that was um, put out for other reasons. We'll say that. Oh, damn you, Hatchak. Sometimes you get on my nerves. But it is not something that is going to cause a ton of problems if this gets passed beyond the problems that it's intended to cause. Just because it is poorly written doesn't even do what they wanted to do properly. So come back, stay tuned. I am very bad at ending these videos, so I'm just going to end it abruptly.